welcome everybody to this panel conversation, which is part of mine, Felicia Bichard, Fräulein Frauke's final exhibition as a master's student at the Stockholm University of the Arts New Performative Practices program. I am part of the international burlesque scene as a performer and a producer, and I wanted to take this opportunity to invite some really interesting people that also are in the academy, to talk to me about burlesque and academy together. So I will introduce them here. We have Jonas Eklund, holds a PhD in theater studies from Stockholm University, 2019. In his dissertation, The Sensational Body, he explores the spectator's experience of bodies on stage in circus, burlesque, and freak show. We have Marianne Anderson, also known as Phoenix Divine. She's a master's student on burlesque as a health promotional practice. This is through the interdisciplinary master program Empowerment and Health Promotion in Oslo, as well as being a burlesque performer and a producer through, among other things, Oslo Burlesque Festival. And we have Salli-Sofia Ritola, is a doctoral student of ethnology at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. Her doctoral dissertation focuses on the politics of appearance in burlesque, addressed through body and gender. So it feels really special to me to have these people here. And I would love to, before we start discussion, I would love to hear a little bit from your perspective of what it is that you do in the work that you do. So, Jonas, do you want to start?
Thank you, and thank you for having us. It's my first fully burlesque panel as well. It might be the first in Sweden, I would guess so it's really interesting. I did a dissertation called The Sensational Body, with the subtitle you heard earlier. And in that work, I used myself. I used a theory called the Ethnology, where you use kind of your own subjective experience to kind of discuss what is happening. So I'm kind of, in my research, I put myself in the audience, as I'm not an actor, so I'm not a performer in any way. So I'm kind of like a audience by default. So I kind of put myself in the audience and viewed circus, burlesque, and freak show, and then tried to understand why the bodies on stage make me feel in a certain way, and try to explore different ways to understand what it's about to be an audience, in a sense. So that's kind of what I did in my dissertation.
Hello. So nice to see all of you here. I've seen some of you at the Oslo Burlesque Festival before, and nice to see you again. In my master's thesis, which I am handing in 2 weeks, so it's not finished, but it's almost finished. I am looking at health promotional burlesque. And the reasoning for that is because I have been doing burlesque for 10 years, and I've talked to a lot of burlesque performers, and a thing that comes back and up again as a theme is that burlesque is empowering, and burlesque has helped me in my life to overcome trauma or other things. And I wanted to look a bit into that, so I've been interviewing 6 burlesque performers in Norway about their experiences of burlesque as a empowering practice. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Salli. Thank you for having me. As Felicia said, I am a PhD student in Jyväskylä in Finland, and my research focuses on the body politics of burlesque, and my perspectives are on the like this idea of loving your body and body political agenda behind burlesque, and how they are conducted and how they mold the Finnish burlesque scene and what challenges there might be about the inclusiveness and age representation and gendered representations.
Okay, lovely, and it feels really nice to have like more than one perspective, both from the side of we are two performers here, one audience member, and one like you're in the scene, you're working with burlesque as a stage.
Yes, I am a stage kitten, and I have been part of Lahti Burlesque Association for a couple of years and began to participate in the production scene as well.
So I feel like it's a nice mix of voices here, especially in regards to Nordic region. And I would like to start, I have loads of kind of questions, but I would like to start with how does your, or our, or whatever, our findings or research focus impact the burlesque scene? Like what is happening with what we have been doing individually, like in academia, affecting the scene?
Well, I can start. I have some notes. In Finland, I have seen that there is a growing interest in burlesque in the academic research. There have been some master degree theses, and it is still very, there are very few researchers, so it's increasing, and there is definitely room for the research in burlesque, and I think that it should be a subject in artistic as well as in academic research, since there's so much stuff to research on, many number of topics to focus on, and it's not like overly studied, in my opinion.
What was the question?
How does your own finding or your research focus impact the burlesque scene?
Well, it's not finished yet, but I really hope it will impact like the way we see like how subcultures can be helping people through their lives, because that's one of the things I've found is that it gives resilience. I don't know the Swedish word, yeah. Like that you can use burlesque as a tool to kind of meet the outer world in a better way after the subjects that I've talked to. After they have started doing burlesque, they meet the society in another way, kind of, and use burlesque through, like, for instance, if they're breaking norms in some way, they use burlesque as a tool to kind of handle the negative social sanctions that they meet in their daily life. And I really hope that can help to see these kind of practices as more than just artistic practice, but also something that can help health-wise. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm not sure if my research has kind of reached out to the burlesque community. It's hard.
I used it.
Oh, yeah, that's good. At least one person is reached. No, but I mean, I think it's a bit of a problem that the academia doesn't really talk to the people actually doing the work in many cases. And I'm really intrigued with this viewing the viewer, because it's kind of into my field of studies with audiences and so on. So, so it's difficult to answer because I don't really know the reach, but I think there's opportunity to kind of work together on topics and kind of taking like a view from like different positions within the field, and then try to kind of think how it affects each other. So I hope it's kind of a starting point to kind of have a discussion with the field, in a sense.
Actually, I was just thinking that doing research on burlesque, actually also, what I have been getting from my participants is that doing research actually makes the burlesque more visible and inclusive in the academia, and that is really important because it also affects the funding that the performers might get. Funding, money. Yeah.
I feel as a student in artistic academia, like it was a bit of because obviously there has been studies on burlesque, but like you were writing in your book, it hasn't been that much. And coming from like this artistic practice has been really interesting because I feel like there hasn't been that much to look at or like look to. And for me, I mean, obviously I don't know, but for me, I would love that these questions comes into the scene, and not to make every burlesque performer like being super serious or super academic, because I think there is a real charm of burlesque of being like, do it yourself, and like it's very grassrooted, like it's very okay to be kind of just started. And there is a charm and something good about that, but I as a performer who has been performing for a lot of years, to situate burlesque in a more academic context has for me, I think, changed the way I have been starting performing. I've been thinking like this in View of the Viewer, like I've been thinking about the relationship in like a more, obviously like a more intellectual way, and I think that has made it easier to hopefully like get the, potentially get the acts further, or you know, the art further. So it feels kind of sad if burlesque is not at all, because I felt like it hasn't been included, especially as an artistic form. Like it has been, it is considered low art, it's low culture, it isn't really invited to have these kind of discussions, and I think it would benefit to be invited, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to do it or do it that way or talk about it, but I find it giving another like dimension to. And also burlesque being such a political form as well, it's kind of nice the more we know as producers as well. I don't know how you guys feel, but like as producers as well, like then we can make more interesting or better choices sometimes. Thought of that.
Was there a question?
No, it wasn't a question. It was like, yeah, what do you think? No, but a question then, as a point of the low culture, or like the, one question I have is like, okay, so I am invited to this like academic space, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm flagging it, I'm doing a podcast. But my question maybe is, because I also can see that there's pluses and minuses. So my question that I've written down is, the so-called low culture has a hard time being taken serious in the mainstream. That's something you were talking about in your book as well. And this is reflected in academia. But what is gained, that we were just talking about, and what is lost when more underground culture is subjected to analysis and research? Do you have any feelings on
that? I think there's a lot to gain, at least at this moment, because they are highly understudied, like all of this, like pop culture, I would say, and our underground culture. At Stockholm University, where I did my PhD, I think I'm kind of the first one doing kind of pop cultural studies within theater and stage performance. And there's like more books about one specific director than on pop cultural theater. And a lot of theater that people visit, like musicals and circus and burlesque, is pop culture. So I mean, it has like a space within society, but not in academia, and I think that's kind of sad. And when it comes to kind of the problems of kind of bringing underground culture up to the mainstream, I think we got a long way to go before it starts to be a problem, I would say. So I don't think we should be too afraid of kind of getting involved within academia as well?
Yeah, I've of course think it's positive since I'm doing it, but I also talked to a couple of performers that are a bit afraid of burlesque becoming like bigger and more mainstream, because then it kind of loses its charm in a way, because it's supposed to be like rough, it's supposed to be like as you said, grassroots. That's what at least those performers want it to be, so they're a little bit afraid when I tell them, oh, I'm researching it, and they're like, oh, okay, don't do it too far, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is a very strong emphasis on the like this punk and self-made attitude, and being like this underground art form and challenging the mainstream and the high culture category. But I kind of was thinking that if you want to think that should burlesque might be taken more seriously or inclusive in the high culture, then does it actually need to change? I mean, can the punk and self-made essence be lost? And if they do, is it good? Is it a good change, or is it a bad change, or what can it bring in the future? Just thinking.
No, but I totally agree. I mean, I don't think it's like one answer, but I've also come across, and even in myself, I can feel sometimes this this fear of, yeah, the mainstream, or what my fear is in specifically in relation to academia, I think, for me, is the realm of sexuality that burlesque is using, because we can talk about burlesque in so many ways, and it is cabaret, and it is dancing, and it is theater, and it is politics, and it is mockery, but it is also sexuality, and it is also stripping. And I think my personal fear is, if we were to take that very important part out, there's still loads to do and loads to talk about, but for me that is the essence. And I mean, I think that here in Sweden we are also very, or Nordic countries probably, like we are very okay to talk about sexuality, maybe in art. Also just how a burlesque performer is perceived in Sweden. I mean legally now. We can get completely naked on stage, it is considered art, while in other countries, for example America, the thing of undressing in front of an audience, it has other laws, and they have to, indecency laws, like they have to wear a thong and so on. So I feel like maybe here it's not such a big fear, but I have this like, oh, what happens if, I'm not saying it would, but if the sexuality is kind of stripped down, stripped off, pun not intended, but yeah, that's kind of my fear, I think, even though I like it.
Then it kind of becomes the burlesque movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's Cher and Christina Aguilera doing burlesque, if you take away the stripping part. And also it's less like charm, I think, in burlesque than if you take away like the main thing, which is stripping, which is basically the thing that divides it from doing drag in a way, because I'm also in the drag scene, but I think that's like the essence of burlesque is in the sexuality and in the stripping part. Don't have to go all the way down, but just remove something, you know.
I think academia could handle the sexuality. I think that's common in different aspects. I don't think that's a big issue. I mean, I think it's important to kind of don't kind of think that mainstream means academia and academia means mainstream. So I mean, there's like different issues. And I think academia would be totally fine with handling the sexuality of burlesque.
But do you really think so? Because, I mean, I totally agree that, yes, in Sweden there is a lot of room to talk about sexuality. But I also feel this kind of fear talking about drag and talking about the world situation, and not to get too much there, but there is also these, like if we're looking maybe further ahead into future, I do not, what is going on? No? Into future, I do not hope come to fruition, but like if we're looking at very right-wing tendencies of stopping things, stopping drag, sexualizing, we can't just have one for the whole thing. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know, just use that one.
Okay, we're gonna swap it around. No, but so even though I don't think it's like a fear now necessarily, especially here, this thing of having a real threat in the future of because school and academia obviously is funded somewhere from. And if those kind of funding principles change, which is not, I'm not saying that is a reason to not to be negative to academia, but I'm saying like it's interesting, or for me, I think it's so important to like stand by this sexuality, and like it's so important because we can't just, I don't know, it feels like one of the political moments in time as well, where you're like, it's actually really important. It shouldn't be like the film, you know, it is this thing. I don't know what I wanted to say about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, but I think in any of those circumstances, I think academia and the art would kind of join forces against the kind of oppression. So I think academia would be like a partner in allowing that rather than being going in line with the power, whoever is in charge. So yeah, maybe.
I also think it depends on what parts of academia you're talking about, because the most of the studies I've read are the feminist studies on burlesque, which is like, is burlesque objectifying women, or is burlesque empowering? And that discussion, if you go on that objectifying side, then you have, then they're against burlesque, kind of. So it kind of depends in what part of academia you end up with burlesque.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have anything to add to those, because I actually agree.
But that's interesting, because yeah, exactly, where does it fit in and why do we fit in? But then we can also talk about, like, so we talked about academia, but then there's also other institutions. You were saying like funding bodies, because obviously one, which I just personally hope for, like that academia gives like a label of trust, or like a label of seriousness to the work that we maybe do anyway, but that gives it like a stamp of approval. Because there has been funding going to burlesque in Sweden, but it's very difficult to get. And especially in this relationship between, which I think is starting to getting looser and looser, but in Sweden it's been very institutionalized, like dance has one institution and theater is another funding body, and then where does burlesque sit? Like within institutions, within academia, within art, and as a thing of then asking for funding, it really falls in between. Like, it's not dance, although we dance. Like, it's not theater, although we use theater. Have any of you found any changes in that?
Yes. This summer, upcoming summer, I will be part of a summer camp for queer people with physical disabilities, where burlesque is part of that summer camp. So it's a 1-week camp and it's been funded by the government. So there is some changes going on. Burlesque is quite young in Norway. We are, I think, the smallest scene of at least Finland, Sweden, Norway. We are the smallest, so it's quite new. So that's really great that we can get funding to do those kind of, and it's also aligning with my master's with the health promotional burlesque. Yeah.
Regarding the funding and burlesque and academia, I actually have noticed doing my own research that like thinking about the low culture label, I feel that at least at the very beginning of my research, the funding was actually really hard to get because burlesque was not seen as kind of like being in the high culture level. So the funders kind of like thought that it might not be important, if you would say, enough to be funded. That's quite sad, but I hope that from our research and work, this will change. I don't know about Norway or Sweden. What is the funding in your countries?
I can talk a bit. We have a hard time getting funds for like the art part of it. If you can't kind of run that yourself, like with ticket sales, then you don't get anything extra if it's not from sponsors. So I don't think that anyone has gotten anything from like the state funding, but drag has in Norway now at least. So maybe we're getting there, but I guess the stripping part is hard for the people in those sections, maybe.
I think sometimes when you study, like, within theater studies that I've been involved in, when it comes to like lowbrow culture and pop culture, there's always this kind of excuse that if you want to research it, you have to find some purpose of it. It has to be like community-based, or it has to be some kind of feministic idea, or it has to be some economical study. But I mean, in my dissertation, I'm trying to put a point that even as it's an art form, and as an art form in its own right, it's important to study and understand. So I'm trying to kind of just consider it an art form rather than being the excuse of some other good things that obviously come from it, but it's also an art form and needs to be treated as such.
Yeah, I totally agree. I am a little bit curious about, because you have done your PhD, you have it, you have a book, I have it, and it's great, tips. But how was your reception? What did the institution think of it, and how were you, treated or welcomed?
Well, I think the theatre department in Stockholm University it's a great department, and it's not a department anymore; it's within a bigger department. But they are really inclusive. We have this view of pretty much anything on stage can be considered theatre, and as such we can study it. So they have always been really supportive. And it has just been really good. And it has a lot to do with the right people being there at the same time as you are and so on. So it's about good timing, I guess. But they have been really supportive. And even outside of Stockholm University, when it comes to the defense and bringing in the jury for the defense and so on, all of them have been really appreciative and think it's interesting and think that we need more of this kind of research. So just only good things.
I would love to open up a little bit if someone has any questions, but is there anything that you guys want to bring up or that you have thought about in relation to these questions before I do? Do we have any questions in the audience? JP. No pressure. Yes, I will give you this. Mic drop.
Not sure how to formulate the question, but like we talked before, since it's such a little closed group of people doing it, even from outside, it's hard to get into the scene. If you don't know anyone or don't have a way in, how do you think, we talked about making it mainstream or keeping it small or whatever, there's of course, if it's mainstream, it's easier for people to get involved, but it takes away the cozy, closed feeling. But how do you think people would have like an easier way to get into it without the contacts?
To the art form?
Yeah, even like from just like watching or performing yourself if you would be interested.
Well, I think that if it becomes more mainstream, or at least a little bit more than now, then people will actually know about it. Because I don't think it's so hard to get into the scene. You can go to classes, you can just make a little act or ask some performer for some tips, and then kind of soon have a stage to stand on. But not so many knows about it. So I think that's what it can help people into it in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that compared to many other art forms, I feel, and maybe it's easy for me to say, but I do feel like it's a fairly easy community to get into, and that's the feedback also I get often from people, that it is a quite welcoming space. But like you say, it also has to exist to be there. And I guess in terms of, yeah, like you were saying, it is because you don't have to go to ballet school for 7 years to be on a stage. Like there is this kind of quite accessible access. And I feel, just from my own experience, that it has a lot to do with talking to people, like go to shows, basically, like go to places where it is. And in a big city like Stockholm, it is fairly easy to do that. And then again, like with availability, like in smaller places, for drag as well, like how do you find your people, like your community? But yeah, it doesn't have that like normal thing of like, I want to do this, so I go to school to study it. It's kind of the other way around. You do it for 14 years and then you go to school. Is that...
A little fun fact, today is exactly 9 years since I had my international debut, which was at Burlesque in Stockholm. And we just sent the producer a message and asked if we could perform. And then we got to perform internationally. And we used that for our resume, in a way. So it's yeah, look at me now.
Actually, I was thinking that my participation in the burlesque scene began from the audience, and I just, when I thought that I want to be part of somehow, I was just went and talked to people and volunteered. That is actually one very good thing to do. To say, I want to do something, how can I help? And that usually leads to other things.
Yeah, and I can also like agree as an audience member. I have rarely been to any type of performance where you have so easy access to people and they are willing to talk to you and dance with you, and so I think it's quite easy, I guess, compared to many other art forms.
Thank you. Yeah, there was one question there. Then I will go there. Then I will go there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't know if you're like interested yourself, but there is, funnily enough, actually something called the Academia of Burlesque in Stockholm. And they have classes, and I hope this doesn't count as like a commercial drop. Yeah, but basically just taking a class is your guaranteed way in, because if you want to do it, if you want to be part of it, rest assured that you are welcome. Just take a class. Thank you.
There was a question here.
I just wondered how would the mainstream burlesque scene look like? Like what would be the drag race of burlesque?
Frightening question. Yeah, no, it is very interesting. Like I've been watching Swedish Drag Race, and I think it is. It's not my favorite TV show, but it is very interesting, inviting a kind of underground art form publicly, openly, queer art form specifically. And of course, I have thought about like what would the burlesque version of this look like, and I think that there is for me, just personally, two things with it. One is, like we were talking about earlier, the sexuality. I think that if you need to put burlesque as mainstream in that proper way, like at SVT on television, you would have to remove a lot of the sexual, like a lot. Otherwise, it would be late night, semi-porn. Like I think that you can't. My personal opinion is that you cannot keep burlesque on that drag race level, and I can stand by my opinion. And the other thing that scares me with that prospect is the willing of our community to make everything into commerce and competition and consuming. I feel like, and I'm not saying burlesque is this perfect world above everything else, but I do feel like it has something that is kind of against that way of thinking. So I look at Drag Race Sweden and I get anxiety for like, oh my God, I would never want to be part of a burlesque version of this. Other people might feel very differently, and that's okay. But to me, I would just feel like now I sound weird, but like the integrity of the art form would be stripped out. Then, of course, we can talk about like more mainstream. I mean, there is shows that are burlesque shows because they have burlesque performance in them, and they're great. But they are much more catered to a more mainstream audience in terms of like the Gatsby ones. Yeah, they're touring Europe. They're great. They're really great performers. But it's much more like kind of ordinary club life. It's DJs that do that kind of songs. It's in venues that have other type of audience, and they really love it. So I don't think like it's kind of the spectra is like the version of Drag Race burlesque here, and then somewhere in the middle there is like stuff that is more mainstream, and then you have like the kind of the very grassroots political queer. Because one thing I have a problem with it's not a problem. But sometimes with these more mainstream shows, there are queer performers in them, but everything is very good looking, and everything is very beautiful in a traditional sense. And I love that, but I don't love only that. And that is one of my issues with kind of catering to the mainstream, that there is a lot of bodies that don't fit in that lineup. So it's not bad to see it, and I have I've been in some of those shows myself. Like, it doesn't take away that it's a queer art form, but it doesn't show all of it that it can be, I think. Do anybody else want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like, you could see like a parallel to the circus, the new circus, where kind of Cirque du Soleil has made like this Disneyfication of the circus. But I mean, at the same time, there's still room for new circus in other ways. So, I mean, it's quite hypothetical. But I mean, I guess the underground burlesque could exist simultaneously as some kind of mainstream burlesque. At least I hope so, and it might even attract new people. So the underground would grow in a sense, maybe.
I love how you're like the voice of reason, and I'm like, burlesque. That's true. I also think that, of course, it can have more than one layer. I think I'm just getting a little bit like defensive of the fear of that the kind of level that I'm interested in will have a hard time kind of fighting its way in. But yeah, it could have more than one space.
I also think that those kind of shows, I also watched those kind of shows, like RuPaul's Drag Race, but it makes an elite within the community, and I don't like that. That there is like that kind of difference, that because they will get the bookings. I think it should be more even in the burlesque community, but that's my opinion, and I can't base it on anything else than that.
Well, I agree, like everything that has been said. I think that the mainstreaming of burlesque, it narrows down the art form in a way, and the normative bodies and like, yeah, that will become maybe the more general in burlesque art.
Thank you. Great question. We have another question here.
Hello, I have a question about the feminist critiques of burlesque in academia. and do these critiques tend to come from a radical feminist perspective, or are there critiques of this from another perspective, and if so, do they tend to miss the fact that burlesque is like kind of a queer art form, or what do you think? Like, tell me more.
Great question. Tell us more. So there are, it's very divided, and I think that they kind of lose some essence in their, because they are spectators. It's never a burlesque performer themselves that researches the scene. It's always someone who's an outsider, and usually they haven't been to many shows. And then you have someone like Jonas here, who's the other perspective, who sees the whole scene in a way, and what kind of things it can contribute with to the society in a way. So it's kind of, it's very like divided, and yeah, I can send you some links if you're interested, but I can't go into all of them. Yeah, there are mainly it's American based, which also is a difference from the European scene. So it's yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I mean the problem is usually that they talk about maybe one performance they have seen, or just a really narrow field of burlesque, and I agree. It's some types of burlesque, depending on the audience and depending on the performance, might have like a problematic way of dealing with the body, and how they kind of make normative bodies kind of become even more normative, but the opposite is also true, and I think a lot of those miss the mark because they discuss it as burlesque, but they don't really have the full picture.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think that I will wrap it up unless you have something more you wanna say. Yeah, thank you so much for listening to this, and thank you so much to my panel participants. Thank you.